안녕하십니까. 아산 정책연구원 함재봉입니다. 오늘 이렇게 바쁘신 중에도 이 특강에 많이 참여해 주셔서 감사합니다. 양해해 주시면은 진행을 원활하게 하기 위해서 제가 영어로 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to this event at the Asan Institute today. We have special guests here, Senator Bob Menendez, who is also the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The story of Senator Menendez, for those of you who know, will already know that it's really a prototypical, typical American success story, almost too good to be true in a sense. But Senator Menendez comes from a Cuban immigrant family. His parents moved to the United States, and I understand that he was born a year or less than a year after they actually arrived on the American soil. His father was a carpenter, his mother was a seamstress, but he in the typical American, true American fashion, he through hard work and diligence, he worked his way up. He, in fact, I understand, was elected to his first public office when he was 20 years old, and basically been in public service ever since. He served in the school board of his local community. He was the mayor of the city where he grew up. He served in the House of the state of New Jersey, the Senate of the New Jersey, and then of course congressman, and then senator. He assumed the senatorship in 2006, I understand, and he is now in his second term. He is, again, for those of you who may know, he is a true friend of Korea's. I think many of you will appreciate the fact that he's recently co-authored a resolution regarding North Korea, regarding the alliance. He's recently penned a very important piece in foreign policy on the North Korean nuclear issue as it is currently being shaped. I think you will also appreciate the fact that he recently, late last year, when that incident in city of Palisade, where the Comfort Women statue, there was an incident where somebody had planted a stake there. The senator actually went to the spot and strongly condemned that action. He's currently on his first tour of the region as the chairman of the committee. He has recently made stops in Japan and Taiwan, and later today he's on his way to China. And he's really taken time off his very busy schedule, I understand, to make his only public speech here at Asan Institute. The topic of his talk today will be economic statecraft and new American internationalism. So please join me in welcoming Senator Menendez.
감사합니다. Thank you very much for your introduction, Shin-Bong, for those gracious words. I'm thrilled to be here today, and I want to thank Dr. M.J. Chung for his invitation to be with us as well, for hosting us here today. I think the work that you have done in building the Asan Institute these past several years has been truly impressive. And it's a pleasure to be in Seoul, South Korea, with such a distinguished group of experts here at the Institute who are well-versed in Asia and Asia-American policy and who fully appreciate the need for a new era of economic statecraft to strengthen our ever-evolving relationship. As I know many in this audience realize and appreciate, the rise of the Asian-Pacific region may well prove to be the single most transformative geopolitical shift of the 21st century. And the Korean miracle is a major part of that story. In the past 20 years, China and India's share of the global economy has tripled. And by 2025, the Asia-Pacific region will account for almost half of the world's economic output. In 2010, U.S. exports to the Asia-Pacific region totaled $775 billion, up almost 26% from 2009. And in 2011, totaled $895 billion, accounting for 60% of our exports, creating and sustaining millions of U.S. jobs in sectors across the board: automobiles, power generation, machinery, aircraft, and other vital sectors of our industrial economy. In just 3 years, we have gone from $775 billion in exports to the region to almost $900 billion. And we can assume that figure will be $1 trillion in the not-too-distant future. I think it's safe to say that for the rest of this century and beyond, much of the strategic, political, and economic future of the world will likely be shaped by the decisions made in Washington and the capitals of this region. At the end of the day, the broader issue for U.S. policy is this: how should the United States go about constructing a strategic framework for our relationship with a dynamic and increasingly important Asian-Pacific region? So here is how I see it personally. First, we must continue every effort at economic statecraft that will rebalance our foreign policy toward the region, making sure that resources are there to work with our allies and partners to shape the broader regional environment in the context of China's influence in the region. Second, we must be clear in acknowledging those areas in which our interests in the region rub up against each other, understanding that America, like any other nation, will always safeguard and promote its own national interests. And third, on this new roadmap to a fundamental shift in rebalancing our policies and priorities is a new rules-based order for the Asia-Pacific community, built upon open and inclusive institutions and procedures for diplomacy, security, and economic cooperation. So the key challenge confronting us as we consider the rebalancing of our policies is how we reconceptualize the problems we face and turn them into opportunities, how we implement concrete policies that will give us these ideas into a practical effect. The overriding U.S. objective for the Asia-Pacific region is the construction of a regional order that maintains peace and security, that maximizes open economies and open societies, while at the same time growing human potential and respecting the fundamental issues of human rights. In the process, it is imperative that we preserve and promote the values and interests both our nations share. The strategic decision by the Obama administration, described as a rebalance to Asia, conveys a clear message to the entire region that America intends to be an active player in the Asia-Pacific region and will remain so for the long haul, and that we seek to build a partnership with all nations of the region in the common enterprise of building an open, inclusive, transparent, rules-based order for the region. The fact is, future U.S. prosperity and security is intimately entwined with a robust engagement on the full range of security, diplomatic, economic, and cultural issues and interests. It will be sustained through the work we do with the most populous states on the planet, as well as with some of the smallest. It must be broad enough and flexible enough to accommodate some of the most modern and advanced economies on Earth, like Korea's, as well as taking the first steps towards the development of modern international trade and financial systems. It will be founded on our close alliances and partnerships, retooled and renewed to meet the demands of the 21st century. It may require new models for new relationships with the region's emerging powers, but those new relationships must be forged and maintained. What I'm describing is a new era of American internationalism and economic statecraft that will depend on partnerships, for example, with the business community to build trade and economic ties to ensure that the benefits of increased prosperity are shared by all. An era that will greatly be enhanced by new, ever-changing modes of communication, enhanced cultural exchanges, and shared educational opportunities, built on a strong foundation of universally held principles, the rule of law, and a core set of shared values. Now, I know there are those in the region who have questions about U.S. endurance, U.S. intentions, and wonder if they can continue to count on U.S. creativity, the United States dynamism, and on the robust American engagement that has underwritten the region's stability and growth. Let me be clear. There should be no doubt, either about the administration or from Congress, about America's resolve or about our ability and willingness to come together and continue to strengthen the rules-based order and architecture of the Asia-Pacific region. And that full-throated commitment to an active, engaged, and enduring U.S. presence in the region is something shared by my committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, as well. Is an approach that starts with the fundamental strengthening of our alliances and partnerships in the region to construct a strategic framework that will last well into the future. That brings me to the extraordinary relationship between our two nations and the situation here on the Korean Peninsula. In my years of public service in New Jersey, in the House of Representatives of the United States Senate, I have seen the deep and genuine connections between our peoples in my own state, among friends and colleagues in New Jersey's Korean American community, reflecting the extraordinary bonds that exist between our two countries and our deep and unshakable commitment to each other. In fact, just last week, I met with members of the Korean American community in New Jersey to hear their views before embarking on this trip and to talk to them about my visit here. I've also seen the bonds in our men and women in uniform, like the American and Korean troops I visited yesterday, who reaffirm the promise that has been the core of our alliance for 60 years. Kapchi Kapshida, we go together. Let me say without equivocation the commitment of the United States to the defense and the security of the Korean people and the Republic of Korea will never waver. But with all that unites us, perhaps the best measure of the strength of our relationship can be seen in the Korean miracle, your transformation over the past 6 decades from a war-ravaged country with crushing poverty to one of the world's most dynamic and innovative economies, a transformation from authoritarianism to democracy, to a global Korea poised to help lead the region and the world, with Korean and New Jersey-based companies like Samsung, with its American corporate headquarters in Ridgefield, New Jersey, that bring our people together to create, to innovate, and to lead a global economy. It is that shared vision of a shared future that brings me here, a shared future and a partnership that is underscored this year as we recall the 60th anniversary of the end of the Korean War on July the 27th. Looking out across the DMZ yesterday, I was reminded, as President Obama has said, that the currents of history here on the Korean Peninsula cannot be held back forever. We stand beside you in your desire to see freedom and dignity enjoyed here in the Republic of Korea shared throughout this divided peninsula, and for the Korean people to be whole and free. So long as Pyongyang continues to engage in provocations, they must understand that there will be no rewards. The continued pursuit of nuclear weapons and advanced ballistic missiles will not produce security for the North and will not drive a wedge between the United States and the Republic of Korea. Nothing will impede our joint vision for the United States and Korea, deeper economic partnership, deeper security cooperation, and deeper cooperation on such issues as energy cooperation through the extension of the 123 agreement. In fact, North Korean provocations, if they continue, will only result in a stronger U.S.-ROC alliance and in stronger international sanctions on North Korea and international condemnation. As President Park made clear when she addressed a joint session of Congress earlier this year, an address that I was privileged to serve on the Escort Committee for, and which was very well received, with her Trust Politique initiative and her proposal for a Northeast Asia Peace Initiative, and now with an agreement to reopen Kaesong, President Park, in a straightforward, determined manner, has presented Pyongyang with a clear path forward. Whether leaders in Pyongyang have the courage that President Park has demonstrated to pursue peace and allow the people of North Korea to build a better life for themselves and their families remains to be seen. Let me just say, from an international policy perspective, this same principle applies with respect to Iran. And that is why Iran also stands alone, unable to convince the international community that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, and why the world has imposed unprecedented sanctions, slowing Iran's nuclear program. So starting here in Korea, then, the administration has strengthened key Pacific alliances with Japan, Korea, the Philippines, Australia, and Thailand to meet the challenges of a changing Asia-Pacific environment, and is seeking not only to strengthen partnerships and alliances with others in the region, but also to strengthen cooperation between our allies. This is the start of the rebalance to the Asia-Pacific region, and it is producing results beyond simply security. It is producing results in an area where we have made and must continue to make significant investments to enhance our capacity in the region, and that is economic statecraft. Clearly, here in Asia, the Americas, Europe, Africa, and across the Middle East, the power of underlying economic forces to transform political realities is becoming increasingly apparent. We have seen economic crises topple governments. A fruit vendor in Tunis begins a revolution that engulfed the region and sowed the seeds of the Arab Spring. In Europe, governments, institutions, as well as political parties and philosophies are being tested. In Latin America, nations are gaining influence not because of the power of their military, but the strength of their economy. And here in Asia, all of us appreciate where American-Asian interests merge and where they diverge. The question for the future is, what can we do to ensure the continuation of a mutually beneficial economic and security relationship for the people of the United States and the Asia-Pacific nations that maximizes the vast potential for cooperation and progress and minimizes the pitfalls. Clearly, there is a nexus between economics and foreign policy, and managing the turbulence of the confluence of those two forces requires economic statecraft. It will require that the United States use every arrow in its quiver, that we project not only military strength where necessary, but the strength of our values and ideas, that we enable and draw together all the department agencies and offices of our government, that we engage and lead international organizations, help establish mechanisms and standards for free and fair trade, help develop a set of goals and standards for intellectual property, financial services, and telecom issues, and that we ensure a set of international labor standards to protect workers everywhere so that the tragedies we have seen in Bangladesh never happen again. That is what I mean by economic statecraft. This year, President Obama articulated a policy of rebalancing our global position that focuses clearly on the growing importance of the Asia-Pacific region. In July, Vice President Biden added that rebalancing also includes a recalibrating our engagement in the Western Hemisphere. He said, and I quote, You see that very concretely in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which included 5 countries in the Western Hemisphere. And you see it in initiatives within the hemisphere like the Alliance for the Pacific, a new group of free market-oriented countries that are integrating their economies and looking west for trade and investment. Building on the Vice President's recent remarks, the strategic importance of the United States economic relationship in the Americas is a subject that I personally have followed closely. For 2 decades, the United States worked tirelessly on those relationships and now has free trade agreements in places that stretch uninterrupted from Canada to Chile. With few exceptions, Western Hemisphere governments are free market oriented and are implementing policies that are lifting their people out of poverty. In the past decade alone, the middle class in Latin America and the Caribbean grew by 50%. This growth and the growth of Latin American economies represents a tremendous opportunity, not only for the United States, but also for all the countries of the Asia-Pacific region as well. One need not look any further than the fact that the total volume of trade between Asia and Latin America grew 700% over the past decade and now stands at $367 billion. To me, that inter-regional comparison underscores the importance of economic statecraft, increasing interconnectivity, and the opportunity to unite both the Americas and the Asian Pacific nations economically that will build a strong middle class in both regions, which in turn can increase purchasing power and economic growth and strengthen security. For me, as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, it is an opportunity to promote the economic and national security benefits of a new American internationalism, focusing more clearly on the Asia-Pacific region as well as Latin America, forming an economically equilateral triangle of nations, each benefiting from the other. That means economic statecraft, realizing the nexus between economic issues and foreign policy, and creating one between our national interests, our security interests, and the aspirations of the people of Asia and Latin America and the United States. At the end of the day, in both Asia and Latin America, we need to create and enhance strong, long-term partnerships that help nations implement strategic policies and complete strategic projects that will help create jobs, wealth, and a middle class. That is economic statecraft for the 21st century. But let's be clear, economic statecraft in the 21st century will require breaking down existing barriers between nations. That means addressing labor and environmental issues so that we can increase trade. In fact, since the United States and Korea entered into a major high-level free trade agreement in March of 2012, KORUS, we have seen a dramatic increase in U.S. manufacturing and agricultural exports to Korea. It is a clear example of the benefits of free trade in the Asia-Pacific region, one which I was pleased to support and vote for. On the other side of the equation, KORUS also supports job-creating investments by Korean firms in the United States, like Samsung, that has invested in creating jobs in New Jersey and other states as well, and we are grateful for that investment. The success of this trade agreement renews our commitment to lowering trade barriers, opening economic ties, freeing commerce, protecting intellectual property rights, and enhancing investment opportunities throughout the region. Breaking down trade barriers can mean more transparent and fairer systems of trade and investment that promote higher labor, environmental, and intellectual property standards. At its foundation, trade is a two-way street, and I believe the goal of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a comprehensive, high-standard trade agreement that aims to liberalize trades in goods and services and remove barriers to foreign investment, is to put us on that two-way street that will lead the United States and the region to greater economic prosperity. The administration has set October of 2013 as a target date to complete negotiations. I, along with my colleagues in the Senate, are awaiting the conclusion of negotiations so that we can review the final agreement and see if it meets the goals we have set for a comprehensive, high standard, and next generation regional agreement that is open and inclusive and that addresses new and traditional trade issues and the challenges we face in the 21st century. So as we consider the best pathway forward to build an economic and trade architecture for the region that will share the benefits of prosperity to all, we must also be aware that China's remarkable rise has not left it immune from its own challenges, challenges important for the region's and the globe's continued growth. China's leadership faces a daunting task in reforming the export-heavy Chinese economy in a global context where there may be limited prospects for a rapid global economic recovery. The challenges of sustaining high levels of economic growth needed to lift hundreds of millions of Chinese who are still in poverty to a better life, providing sufficient jobs and affordable housing for the tens of millions of young Chinese joining the labor market each year as they move from the countryside to cities, and addressing the ongoing labor and environmental issues that China's rapid growth has created. The fact is, the United States, China, and the region all face fiscal and economic challenges that must be addressed. The American Congress is looking at options on how to meet the challenges we face in immigration reform, in tax reform, in fiscal policy that will sustain the progress we have already made. Chinese leaders, likewise, understand that political reform of the past 30 years may not be sufficient to meet the needs or aspirations of the Chinese people and a rapidly growing middle class. Reducing corruption, setting up a standardized institutional decision-making process, allowing people more freedom in their private lives is fundamental, but in my view, it remains to be seen if it is enough. If China will ultimately engage as a partner in the shared challenge of building open, more inclusive, and I dare say, more democratic mechanisms and institutions for the region. Now, don't get me wrong, we welcome China's economic progress, but hope that it will also bring with it more individual freedom. And on to the economic and trade front, we need to be able to work together to address the very real challenges of intellectual property theft, tariff and non-tariff barriers, state-owned enterprises, and the cyber threat that many American companies face. We must be clear-eyed and consistent in our approach to China, develop opportunities for cooperation on shared political, economic, environmental, and security objectives, while at the same time exerting a firm insistence that China live up to its obligations to the international community and adhere to international norms, institutions, and the rule of law. We need to be firm in pressing for greater protection of intellectual property rights, a level playing field for U.S. firms, labor standards, and the promotion of workers' rights, and a range of other policy changes that would ultimately benefit firms and workers in both the United States and China. This question of a rules-based order is not simply one that applies to economic and trade issues. However, it also applies to pressing security issues, including maritime issues. The United States has deep national security interests in freedom of navigation in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, and supports the peaceful diplomatic resolution of maritime territorial disputes. In the South China Sea, the United States will continue to support a peaceful process to resolve these disputes consistent with the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea and the 2002 ASEAN-China Declaration of Principles in the South China Sea. In recent weeks, China has made positive statements about re-engaging with ASEAN on the Code of Conduct, and we look forward to successful and productive discussions between China and ASEAN to develop a binding code. And in both the East China Sea and the South China Sea, whatever maritime disputes simmer, the United States calls on all parties from refraining from threatening or using force or coercion to support their claims. We may not take a position on ultimate sovereignty and territorial disputes, but we certainly do take a position on acceptable behavior and on the importance for all of free and open access and freedom of navigation. These are real challenges to the region's shared economic prosperity, challenges which require us to work together to develop a shared approach on common interests and concerns. Congress has a vital role to play in addressing all of these issues, in reviewing U.S. laws to determine whether they need to be strengthened to protect against intellectual property theft and cyber espionage, in the development of standards to protect the computer systems that run critical sectors of the economy, in securing our network and deterring attacks, and in treaties that will help resolve maritime territorial disputes. Let me conclude by saying that for the United States to successfully rebalance to Asia, we can best do it from a position of economic strength and must continue to put our own economic house in order. Reinvigorating the American economy remains fundamental to our economic statecraft and to all that I have proposed on the future of U.S.-Asia-Pacific relations. Those who in the past, however, have bet against America's ability to renew and to remake ourselves have been wrong. I am confident that continues to be the case as we re-engage and rebalance in this region. When we look at Asia today, there are two conflicting drivers: the forces of globalization bringing our economies together, and ethnic and political nationalism threatening to pull our countries and our economies apart. Constructive and strategic American engagement in Asia is, in this sense, in the interest of Korea and of all nations in the region, especially if we can create ways together to institutionalize cooperation and manage competition, creating a rules-based order for the Asia-Pacific region. That is what is needed as we work towards a mutually beneficial future for both of our nations and for the world. It is a future within our grasp, and it is a future we must strive to realize. Thank you very much for having me with you, and I'll be happy to entertain some questions.
Thank you, Senator, for that comprehensive and clearly laid out speech that clearly laid out the vision that you have for the future of the region. Thank you for agreeing to take a few questions. I'd like to take first, I think we should take maybe 3 questions together and then give you a chance to respond, and then if we have some more time, we'll take another round. So, the floor is open. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and we have microphones available. And if you could very quickly identify yourself and then ask the question. Dr. Park Jin.
My name is Jin Park. I'm a former chairman of Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee in the Korean National Assembly. Welcome to Korea.
Thank you.
And thank you for your insightful speech this morning. I have 2 brief questions. One is about the challenge of rising China in Asia. You mentioned the cooperative and conflictive relationship with China in the area of security and free trade and human rights, intellectual properties. Can you kind of briefly define the future U.S.-China relationship in Asia under the new American internationalism? What kind of U.S.-China relationship do you foresee to unfold in the future? Secondly, is about Japan. As you may know, currently Korea-Japan relationship is at a very seriously low level, largely because of the voices of retrogressive nationalism and historical distortion in Japanese leading circles. What role do you think the U.S. can play to improve the relationship between Korea and Japan, both of which are allies to the United States? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Park. Another question? Anybody? Yes. Go ahead.
Carl Friedoff, the Asan Institute. I have a question on the special measures agreement, the negotiations currently ongoing to raise the percentage that Korea is paying for the basing of U.S. troops here. looking at this from the perspective of public opinion, which is what I focus on here, it has a couple elements that could really make this a dangerous negotiation in terms of kind of latent nationalism among South Koreans, as well as this idea that Koreans are going to look at how these negotiations were handled with Japan. And so given that that is the background, and also the ongoing financial constraints of Korea, I know everyone looks at Korea and sees that it weathered the global financial crisis fairly well, but with welfare pledges ongoing and the inability to raise taxes, Korea is also facing its own financial constraints. So how hard is the U.S. willing to push on the special measures agreement? And does it have a percentage in mind? Is it a threshold of 50%, or is it going to be lower than that? Where does the U.S. come down on that? Thank you.
One more question? Yes, Dr. Easley.
Thank you, Senator. Leif Eric Easley. I'm a professor at Ewha Women's University here in Seoul and a research fellow at the Asan Institute. And I'm an American proud to see the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee speaking here at Asan. Thank you very much. I'd like to commend you, sir, on your remarks recently made in Taipei. And I was wondering if you could please compare some of your observations during your trips to Taiwan and to South Korea, particularly in terms of how these partners fit into the U.S. rebalance to the region. Thank you.
Okay.
네, 질문 세 가지 먼저 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째 질문하신 분 두 가지 질문하셨습니다. 그 아시아에서 중국의 역할 부상으로 인해서 도전 과제에 대한 질문하셨습니다. 첫 번째는 일단 아시아에서의 그 지금 많은 나라들이 중국과 협력적 그리고 갈등적인 관계들을 여러 가지 사안에서 함께 갖고 있는데 미중 관계가 아시아에서 앞으로 어떻게 진행이 될 것인지 미국의 신국제주의 차원에서 어떻게 보시는지 궁금하고요. 두 번째는 한일 관계가 여러 가지로 그 상황이 좋지 않은데 그 여기에 있어서 미국의 역할에 대한 질문을 하셨습니다. 두 번째 질문은 현재 협상이 진행 중인 방위비 분담금 특별협정 SMA 그 분담금과 관련된 질문입니다. 여론에 의해서 여러 가지로 많은 사람들이 관심을 갖고 있는데 또한 그 결과물을 일본과 어떻게 비교할 것인가에 대한 얘기도 있고 현재 그 한국 정부가 예산 압박을 겪고 있고 또 이제 복지 공약과 또 세제 문제 개편안의 그런 어려움 이런 것으로 인해서 예산 문제가 크게 화두가 되고 있습니다. 미국이 현재 얼마나 강력하게 이와 같은 그 분담금액을 밀어붙일 예정인지 그 유념하고 있는 그 퍼센티지가 따로 있는지 50%인지 그 밑인지 궁금하고요. 세 번째는 대만에서 언급하신 부분에 있어서 대만과 한국과 갖고 있는 미국의 그런 파트너십들이 미국의 이런 재균형 정책에 어떻게 이제 들어맞는지에 대한 의견이 궁금합니다.
Excellent translation. Please, Senator.
I didn't realize you said all of that. So let me go through them as they were asked. With reference to China's rise in Asia and our relationship, I think President Obama has made it clear, and I certainly view it as the chairman of the committee, that our rebalancing here to Asia is not a challenge to China, it is an engagement with the region. It is a hope to bring all the countries of the region, including China, into a rules-based regime in which international order, economic opportunity, peace, and prosperity can be promoted. So our goal is not to challenge China, it's to engage it. And to the extent that your government and your president has had engagements, a very recent visit with China, and that other countries in the region, Taiwan and Japan and others, have had engagements, we welcome those engagements. There are some who suggest that such engagement means maybe a drifting away from the United States. I do not believe that that is the case. That this is an effort to create a region of greater peace and security. So our efforts with China, we recognize there are differences, but our efforts is to create an international institutionalized order in which differences can be resolved. And so it is in that respect that we see China as a global power for which we hope will play an increasingly more constructive role. In the interim, as we aspire to achieve that, we will continue to work on both economic and security issues with a real sense of the challenges that exist within the region, both in the national security of the United States and those of our allies, such as the Republic of Korea. Now, with reference to Japan, I believe the relationships are very important, specifically from a strategic defense. I applaud the government of South Korea engaging in trilateral exercises in order to promote combined security interests. I think those send strong messages in the region to all of the players. I do believe that historical issues need to be met and healed. I think nations are liberated when they recognize their past. In the United States, in a different context, obviously, in a different context, but by way of example. In the United States, slavery was our original sin. And we did not become as great a country until we ended the shackles of slavery, recognized the abuses that had taken in the past, and moved forward. And then we became a much stronger country, I believe, as a result of it. So meeting the challenges of history are important in freeing oneself to become the full potential that is necessary and to create relationships. By the same token, there has to be a willingness to receive efforts to achieve that, overcoming those historical challenges. And if such an environment can be created, it would be good for all of the people of the region. I'm sorry, I forgot that you're translating this as we go along.
먼저 중국에 관련된 중국의 아시아 지역에서 어떤 부상에 관련된 질문부터 다루도록 하겠습니다. 그 아시아 지역에서 그 중국의 부상에 관련돼 있어서 오바마 대통령께서도 분명히 말씀을 하셨고, 저도 이제 위원장으로서 외교위원장으로서 말씀을 드리자면 우리의 아시아 재균형 정책이라는 것은 중국에 도전을 가하는 것이 아니라 이 지역 전체 국가들과 함께 관여하고자 한 인게이지하고자 함이라는 점을 분명히 말씀드립니다. 이 지역 내 모든 국가들, 여기는 중국도 포함됩니다만 법칙에 입각한 그런 질서, 국제 질서를 수립하고 이 질서 하에서 모든 경제적인 기회와 평화와 번영이 증진될 수 있도록 하는 것을 추구하는 것이 우리의 목표입니다. 그리고 이와 같은 목표는 중국에게 도전을 가하는 것이 아니라 중국과도 함께 관여하고 인게이지하자라는 그런 것을 담고 있습니다. 최근 한국 정부, 특히 박근혜 대통령께서 방중을 통해서 여러 가지 중국과 이런 그 노력들을 많이 하셨고, 이 지역 내 다른 국가들, 대만이나 중국, 일본 같은 경우에도 이와 같은 노력들을 펼치고 있는데 우리는 이와 같은 노력들을 환영하는 바입니다. 일부 사람들은 이러한 것들이 미국을 여기 이 지역에서 멀리 떨어뜨리지 않느냐라고 얘기하시지만 저는 그것은 아니라고 생각합니다. 이와 같은 노력들은 결국 우리가 이 지역 내 안보를 보다 확고하게 하고자 함이며, 물론 이 중국과 이런 부분에 있어서 서로 간에 다른 점이 있다는 점을 인지하고 있지만 우리가 국제적인 어떤 제도와 질서를 뚜렷하게 수립함으로써 그와 같은 차이점들이 서로 해결될 수 있는 그런 제도 마련을 제도 마련에 이제 노력을 해야 된다고 생각합니다. 그러한 차원에서 우리는 중국을 국제적인 강대국으로 이제 보면서 보다 앞으로 건설적인 역할을 해줄 것을 기대하는 바입니다. 그리고 이와 같은 목적을 달성하기 위해서 이 지역 내 여러 가지 도전 과제들을 이제 해결하는 데 있어서 우리가 갖고 있는 어떤 감각, 이런 것들을 경제나 안보 분야에 있어서도 함께 해나가야 한다라는 그런 의식을 갖고, 이것은 미국의 안보, 국가 안보뿐만이 아니라 한국의 그런 것에도 마찬가지라고 생각합니다. 일본 문제에 대해서 말씀을 드리자면 한일 관계라는 것은 매우 중요하고 구체적으로는 전략적인 방위의 측면에서 특히 그러하다고 생각합니다. 한국 정부 같은 경우에 최근에 3국 간에 있었던 어떤 훈련에 참여하는 좋은 결정을 해주었습니다. 이것은 우리 간의 그 연합 안보 이해관계 구축에 상당히 좋은 의미를 가지고 있으며 이 지역 다른 국가들에게도 강력한 메시지를 전달했다고 생각합니다. 역사적인 사안이라는 것이 이제 어려운 문제이고 이것이 이제 먼저 다루어져야 되고 또 치유가 되어야 할 필요가 있다고 생각합니다. 우리가 과거를 제대로 인식할 때 진정으로 그로부터 자유롭게 될 수 있다고 생각합니다. 물론 미국에서의 이런 과거의 문제라는 것은 보다 다른 차원에서의 이슈라고 할 수 있습니다. 예를 들어 노예제 같은 것을 본다면 뭐냐면 노예제를 완전히 종료시키고 이것을 해결하고 앞으로 나아갈 준비가 되기 전까지 그때가 되었을 때만이 우리는 보다 위대한 국가로 발돋움할 수 있었고 보다 강력한 국가가 될 수 있었다는 것이 저의 생각입니다. 따라서 이런 역사가 제기하는 그런 도전 과제들을 우리가 다시 한번 직면할 필요가 있고 그러므로 인해서 우리가 갖고 있는 완전한 어떤 잠재력을 충분히 자유롭게 펼칠 수 있고 보다 나아질 수 있다고 관계 또한 나아질 수 있다고 생각합니다. 그런데 이러한 부분에 있어서 그 어떤 과거의 역사적인 도전 과제들을 극복하고자 있는 노력을 서로 간에 받아줄 수 있는 또 이제 의지나 그런 부분들이 중요한 의미를 지니는 것도 마찬가지입니다.
Thank you. With reference to your question on the Special Measures Agreement and the challenges, look, we honor our history together. We honor the sons and daughters of Korea and the sons and daughters of America who shed lives in order to promote peace and prosperity and freedom in the region. As we have moved over 60 years, we will continue to honor that reality. Our challenge, of course, in both countries is economic challenges. We will continue to negotiate in good faith. We do not have a specific, to my knowledge, we do not have a specific percentage that we are looking at, but we are obviously looking to create security through strength. From my own perspective, the way in which you deter, in addition to our international sanctions and our isolation of North Korea through strength here in South Korea in combination with our partnership.
방위비 분담금 특별협정 SMA에 관련된 질문에 답변을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 우리는 그 한미 양국이 함께 해온 역사를 존중하며 한국과 미국의 젊은이들, 아들, 딸들이 이곳에서의 자유를 지키기 위해 평화와 번영을 위해서 희생을 했다는 점을 존중하는 바입니다. 지난 60년 동안 우리는 이와 같은 그 현실들을 우리가 잘 관계들을 중시하면서 잘 지켜왔다고 생각을 합니다. 지금 현재 한미 양국 모두가 경제적인 도전에 직면해 있는 그런 상황입니다. 앞으로의 협상 역시 계속해서 성심을 가지고 계속되어야 한다고 생각하고 제가 알기로는 어떤 구체적인 비율을 염두에 두고 있지는 않은 것으로 알고 있습니다. 분명한 것은 우리가 보다 이 지역에서의 어떤 이를 통해서 안보 환경을 구축함으로 인해서 그 어떤 국제사회의 제재와 북한의 이제 고립에 대한 그런 것뿐만이 아니라 또 하나의 억지력을 이제 강화시키는 차원에서 노력한다는 점입니다.
When I was in Japan, I raised the questions of Okinawa, and as we seek to reduce the footprint in Okinawa, but we still need a presence in Okinawa. And that has consequences and costs to it, especially as we transition part of our forces to Guam. It is in the national security interest of the United States. I believe it's in the national security interest of Japan. And to be very honest with you, that force in Okinawa is a national security interest for Korea as well. And so, there are challenges in both elements of that. And we openly and frankly discuss those challenges there. Here, we have challenges as well. There are some strategic defensive investments that must be made in order to both eventually achieve transfer of operational control on the conditions-based process, and secondly, to strengthen and have that qualitative edge for which will send a message to North Korea and others in the region that any consideration of aggression against the South has a real consequence. And so those are challenges that all countries face, including our own, between our security and defense posture and our desire to meet some of the social issues of our respective countries. And we will work in good faith to try to strike a right balance.
일본에서 그 사실은 제가 오키나와에 관련된 그런 사안들도 제기를 했었습니다. 오키나와에서 미군의 어떤 주둔 규모를 줄이려는 그런 노력들이 진행이 되고 있지만 여전히 미군의 그런 주둔 상황이 필요한 그런 상황입니다. 그리고 이와 같은 노력들을 함에 있어서 거기에 따른 결과가 충분히 따를 것입니다. 물론 일부 병력들이 괌으로 이동된다거나 그런 부분들도 이제 고려가 되고 있지만 사실 이와 같은 것들은 미국의 안보뿐만이 아니라 일본의 안보 이익에도 관련이 되어 있고 오키나와에 주둔하는 그런 미군들 같은 경우에는 한국의 안보 이익에도 관련이 되어 있는 부분들이 있습니다. 따라서 양측 그 어떤 모든 그런 요소들의 어떤 도전 과제들을 우리가 살펴보고 솔직하게 이런 도전 과제들이 있다라고 서로 간에 논의를 할 수 있다고 생각합니다. 그리고 이제 어떤 전략적인 방위 투자가 이제 있어야 할 필요가 있는 부분들이 있습니다. 이것은 그 전시작전 통제권의 전환이 이제 예정된 대로 진행이 되고 이것을 조건에 입각해서 진행을 하는 그런 것을 이제 달성할 필요가 있다라는 차원에서도 그렇고 다시 한번은 이제 그 북한에 대해서 억지를 함에 있어서 질적인 우위를 점함으로써 다시 한번 북한 측에도 강력한 메시지를 전달할 수 있는 계기가 되기에 그렇습니다. 그리고 북한이 만약에 어떠한 도발을 감행할 경우에 거기에 대한 진정한 대가가 있을 것이다라는 점을 확실하게 하는 것에도 의미를 갖습니다. 따라서 우리 모든 관련 국가들에게 도전 과제가 될 것입니다. 안보라든가 방위뿐만이 아니라 사회적인 부분에 있어서도 역시 그 크게 도전 과제가 되기 때문에 이러한 부분에 있어서 균형을 맞추기 위해 우리 모두가 노력해야 할 것입니다.
Professor, with reference to your question, let me just say, first of all, that since you said you're Korean American, I am very proud of the Korean American community in my home state and in the United States of America. They have shown themselves to be smart, industrious, entrepreneurial, help rebuild communities that sometimes were significantly in decline and now are prosperous again. They have traditions of faith and family and hard work and love of country, so I certainly applaud their history in our country.
네, 그리고 그 한국계 미국인 이제 말씀하셨는데요. 그 한국계 미국인들에 대해서 저희 뉴저지 주에 있는 그런 한인 사회들 그리고 미국에 있는 한인 사회들에 대해서 저 굉장히 자랑스럽게 생각합니다. 이분들은 아주 똑똑하고 또 근면하고 또 때로 지역 사회가 어려움을 겪고 쇠퇴를 겪었을 때 이들을 다시 한번 일으키는데 많은 노력을 기울여서 다시 번영의 길로 접어들 수 있도록 기여하신 분들입니다. 그리고 가정과 근면, 성실의 어떤 그 가치들을 잘 지키고 계신 분들이라고 생각합니다.
As it relates to your question, I think I've touched upon some of it in both my remarks and answers here, but let me just say what I have said throughout the region in Taiwan when I was there, where they are obviously under the One China policy, pursuing cross-straits relationships in a way that promotes peace and stability for the Taiwanese, but still preserves that ability for them to conduct their affairs in the manner in which they have seen fit, which has obviously greater freedoms for the people of Taiwan than those on the mainland, has great prosperity along the way. So we welcome their engagement with China in good cross-straits relationships, as we welcome your government's engagement of China in pursuit of greater peace and stability in the region. And when I say we welcome those efforts, it should be a clear signal that our rebalancing to Asia is not a challenge to China, but an engagement with it. We do not seek for countries not to engage China. We actually embrace those efforts. And we think it is important in creating an environment within the Asia-Pacific region ultimately to achieve all of our mutual goals.
제가 대만에서 했던 이야기들에 관련된 질문을 하셨습니다. 그 제가 앞서 연설에서도 잠깐 언급을 했는데요. 분명히 현재는 그 하나의 중국 정책에 입각을 해 있습니다. 그리고 이 하나의 중국 정책에 입각해서 양안 관계를 유지를 함에 있어서도 보다 평화와 안정을 증진하는 방향으로 가고 있고 또 그러면서도 그 대만 스스로 어떤 그 국민들의 자유와 또 보다 많은 사람들이 이와 같은 것을 이제 대륙에서 누릴 수 있도록 하는 그런 것도 함께 중시를 하고 있는 모습을 볼 수 있습니다. 이것이 이제 그 보다 그 상호 간의 번영을 위해 가는 그런 방향으로 생각을 하는데 이런 그 중국과의 그 대만 간의 어떤 그 관계 교류라든가 양안 관계 지역의 그런 노력들을 저희는 환영하는 바입니다. 마치 저희가 한국과 중국 간의 이와 같은 평화 안정의 노력, 교류를 환영한 것과 마찬가지입니다. 이와 같은 것들을 우리가 환영한다라는 것은 결국 이것이 우리의 아시아 재균형 정책이 중국에 도전을 가는 것이 아니라 이들과 함께 관여하고자 한다라는 그 강력한 아주 분명한 신호를 보내기 때문입니다. 그래서 우리가 이 지역의 그 국가들에게 중국과의 그런 관여를 하지 말라고 얘기하는 것이 아니라 오히려 이것들을 받아들임으로 인해서 보다 상호 간의 혜택을 입을 수 있는 그런 호혜적인 환경을 다 같이 만들어내는 데 중점을 두고 있는 것입니다.
Having said that, let me also add that, and this is now in my own view, speaking for no one else other than myself as the chairman of the committee, I will continue to pursue assistance under the Taiwan Relations Act to provide defensive abilities to Taiwan. I will continue to pursue with the Republic of Korea the efforts to pursue its security and to continue the umbrella that we have with the Republic of Korea and to hopefully see the Republic of Korea make some of the critical investments I mentioned before in terms of its own strategic defensive abilities. And I will continue to advocate deepening economic ties with both those two countries and other countries within the region, and to pursue security initiatives within the region that create what I think at the end of the day, as a result of that effort, is greater peace and stability within the region. So this is both a welcoming of engagement with China, both by us in the United States as well as by our partners and allies within the region, and at the same time a parallel track that ensures that the security and economic initiatives are strengthened so that we can ultimately mutually achieve the goals I think that we have as a people.
따라서 저의 그 의견으로는 물론 제가 상원의 외교위원장을 역시 함께 맡고 있습니다만 앞으로도 이렇게 대만이 스스로를 이제 방위할 수 있는 능력 차원에서 미국이 도와주는 그런 도움을 제공하는 것들을 계속해서 추구할 것이며 역시 같은 차원에서 한국이 그 안보를 보다 이제 강력하게 할 수 있도록 드리는 노력에 있어서도 우리가 기존에 제공했던 어떤 우산의 능력이라든가 이런 부분들도 계속해서 제공할 수 있도록 노력할 것입니다. 따라서 앞서 말씀드렸던 것처럼 전략적인 어떤 방위의 투자 차원에서 한국이 할 수 있는 그런 빠른 투자 같은 것들이 계속해서 한편으로 노력이 이루어지게 될 것이고 이 두 나라뿐만이 아니라 다른 나라들과도 이런 안보의 이니셔티브들을 보다 증진하게 된다면 그 결과는 이 지역의 더 큰 평화와 안정으로 이어지리라 생각을 합니다. 따라서 이러한 차원에서 중국 등을 포함한 여러 국가들과의 어떤 그 관여라든가 우리가 동맹국으로서 또 파트너로서 이 지역 국가들 간의 그런 관계를 환영하는 바입니다. 따라서 이런 안보와 경제 이니셔티브들을 보다 증진함으로써 우리가 서로 간에 상호적으로 더 많은 것을 이제 얻을 수 있는 그런 환경으로 갈 수 있도록 하는 것이 목표입니다.
Let me close by thanking you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join with me and share today. I appreciate your questions. They were exceptional, and I didn't expect anything less. And we have a bright future together, and it is a future that I look forward to working together to make sure that we seize and realize. Thank you very much.
다시 한번 오늘 참석해 주셔서 감사합니다. 좋은 질문 감사드립니다. 앞으로의 미래도 우리가 함께 헤쳐나갈 수 있기를 기대합니다.
Thank you, Senator. Please join me in thanking Senator again.